Before I get started, I want to share something our community contributed. The Breaktime shorts, which accompany the main anime, are hosted on Kadokawa's YouTube channel for all to see, but without subtitling. However, they allow embedding their videos on other sites, and so a couple members utilized a site that enables custom captioning of said embeds to make legally available subtitled versions of the shorts so far. They have asked to remain anonymous themselves, but don't mind sharing the fruit of their efforts with others. I've added the links to the description of this video. However, I will not be incorporating this information found in the shorts into these segments. I might at the very end, in a distinct separate section, but the main anime remains the only text for these segments. Alright then, today we're going to talk about the 6th episode in conjunction with the remaining topics and moments from these first episodes that I have not yet discussed in these last 2 Casual Mondays. There's just always a lot to talk about in this series, you know? We'll begin with something we discussed back during the premiere episode, once we understood which characters would be involved in the season. This is going to take just a moment to explain, but I think it's a useful perspective for the entire 3rd season. Something I praise RE0 for is how it manages its large cast, and it's something easier said than done. Adding characters to a story can inject a bit of novelty and mystery into the audience experience, but it comes with a cost. Each newcomer must compete with others for screen time and development, and characterization itself can slow down narrative progression. Once a cast reaches a certain size, it becomes unwieldy to have all of them in each scene, and so weaving multiple subplots becomes an attractive option. But this too can slow down a sense of narrative progression, as now the plots must compete with one another for their turn in the spotlight. There's 2 really common pitfalls we frequently see with expansive casts. One is introducing a new character for the novelty and excitement they bring, focusing a lot on said character for a few episodes, and then relegating them to the background while the story repeats the process. For a serialized story, this is no issue, mystery or monster of the week, or a travelogue, where we kind of expect characters to come and go. But the constant accumulation of newcomers causes a story glut, until you either have whole stretches of the character lingering around without anything to do, or you try to give everybody 1 or 2 lines in each chapter to make them seem relevant. And neither of those is particularly satisfying if you were invested in those people. The second pitfall is to simply subordinate the goals of the other characters to the protagonist. They want what the MC wants, can be assumed to support major decisions, and there is no need to spend time exploring their own motivations so that we understand their behavior. They no longer have a storyline that exists apart from the main character. Now, this solves the problem of the glut slowing down the narrative, to be sure, but it's also an unsatisfying situation to have characters rendered so simply. Some series even manage to jump into both of these pitfalls at once. RE0 primarily solves this by treating itself more like a theatrical play. Characters go on and off stage in ways that make sense, allowing increased focus on those present. To illustrate what I mean, let's think back about how we have met the main cast. In the first episode, we largely are meeting Subaru, who's then joined by Emilia and Puck. Around the halfway mark of the double-length premiere, they are killed by Elsa, and in the reset, Subaru rushes to the loot house and we meet Romji and Felt, as well as a little bit of Elsa. Emilia and Puck were sent off stage to give Romji and Felt space on stage. The second episode introduces Reinhard briefly, then we return to Felt and Romji in a different context and add Emilia right at the end. Then in the third episode, we add back Elsa and Reinhard, giving us every named character in one scene only after they got a chance to be characterized in 1s and 2s. From there, we leave the capital for a more isolated setting, taking only Subaru, Emilia, and Puck, and we add 4 new characters, Rem, Ram, Roz, and Betty. We spend 8 episodes largely getting to know these 4, with a little bit of interaction in the nearby village, but crucially, Subaru spends alone time with Emilia, Ram, Rem, and Betty separately, allowing each more focus to develop our understanding of them. In the dead middle of the first season, we get the 2-part Royal Selection adventure, delivering a series of sharp initial characterizations of the other selection candidates and their knights, plus Wilhelm, plus brief reunions to Felt, Romji, and Reinhard. But it does not keep all of them around as an extended cast, crowding the stage. In fact, the opposite happens. Puck and Emilia, who'd been around all along, are largely absent for most of the rest of the season, and Subaru and Rem remain in Kruge's manor with Felis and Wilhelm, allowing us to learn them. The successive attempts to stop the cultist attack will introduce Juice, and let us interact a little bit with Anastasia and Priscilla, and we'll add Otto to the story along the way. But that stretches over several episodes, and the interactions are, again, in small groups. Kruj and Rem then also go off stage at the end while we spend time with Julius and Felis, and we add back Rom and Emilia. So hopefully you see what I mean. The flow of the story and the changing settings naturally subdivide the cast. The resulting smaller gatherings allow us more insight into each individual, and it happens in a way that feels organic because it stems from the narrative progression. That pattern is especially easy to see in the second season, as the Sanctuary naturally isolates part of the cast, and the crisis is very specific to those involved. None of the capital characters have any involvement, of course, and Rem and Puck are sent off stage in the first episode, which especially gives Emilia some space. But even within that second season, there are 3 distinct groupings by location. You have Sanctuary characters, Mansion characters, and the Witches. That divide ensures that the character count at any one time is manageable. So with that pattern established, we get to the third season. Puck and Rem remain off stage, but are motivating forces for Emilia and Subaru respectively. Their story impact is present even if they are not. Changing locations means leaving Roz, Rom, Petra, and Frederica behind. Garfield and Betty and Emilia ended the second season by changing their relationship to Subaru, and so bringing them along in a reduced party gives us an opportunity to observe the new dynamic with fewer distractions. Then, we get to Peristera, and suddenly we have all the candidates and their immediate supporters gathered in one place, even those who weren't invited. What's more, being away from their respective territories means smaller retinues and some shared lodgings, creating a proximity and resulting interactions that would not have happened somewhere like the capital. This is no doubt delightful for the audience, but there are potentially 2 problems here. One is the pitfalls of large casts that I've already talked about, and we do at least have a pattern for how that has been handled. The other is the problem of narrative tension. The subdividing the cast throughout the story has helped characterization a lot, but it also meant that each crisis had to be met with limited resources. Failure seemed like a real option during many encounters because it was, with the story continuing only because Subaru reset it. An audience needs to believe that there are real stakes and real risks in a scene if they are to share the character's apprehension. The threat needs to seem equal to or greater than what they can bring to bear. So, what happens when you bring the martial prowess of Reinhard, Wilhelm, Ricardo, Garfield, and Kruj alongside the magical aptitude of Julius, the triplets, Betty, Emilia, and Felis? To say nothing of the savvy of Anastasia and Otto, or the X-factor of Priscilla and Al. And Subaru still has Return by Death on deck, to say nothing about his amazing skills with a whip. That is quite the arsenal of powerful and capable people, plus Subaru. Thus, we had a simple question after we watched the premiere. How do you create a situation that challenges that gathering? 3 possibilities occur to us immediately. You divide them externally, breaking them apart into smaller groups and/or incapacitating individuals when possible. You divide them internally, with circumstances or motives that put them at odds instead of being united, or you simply bring some level of threat that is still a challenge to their total strength. 6 episodes in, and arguably we have seen all of these at play. In terms of external division, through 6 episodes we have seen Betty, Kruj, and Mimi sent off stage, with Mimi's situation limiting TV and hetero as well. Emilia is kidnapped and isolated, Reinhard, Felt, and Otto were at least temporarily separated from the fight, and Priscilla's whole entourage is split from one another. But even without this, the presence of so many archbishops and other cultists necessitates splitting up. That is part of that third possibility, bringing a level of threat that challenges our cast. Archbishops are no joke on their own, and 4+ is certainly ratcheting up to the threat level. Their powers, too, are troublesome in the way that they cause psychological harm. Reinhard might be able to beat Sirius, but slaughtering a whole square due to her power is not a victory they will want to accept. The unrest her authority is causing in the shelters is also going to divide their attention and resources. Capella transforms people into monstrosities, and we can see just in Felis's reaction how this disrupts and distracts. Bly can eat people's names or memories, yet another horrifying fate to inspire dread and hopelessness, and the unhealing wound Mimi suffered is another stressor on our hero's psyche. In totality, then, the problem isn't only that the archbishops are strong and think nothing of killing people, but that they are more than happy just to inflict pain and suffering and erode their opponent's will to fight. And that itself can lead to the second possibility, the internal divisions. We have already seen Phyllis try to retract from cooperation when something happens to Kruj, back when she lost her memories and he proposed breaking off the alliance with Emilia's camp. With Betty and Emilia out of pocket, you really need him to have his head in the game. You also have existing frictions that can potentially boil over, and here is where I finally want to return to talking about the Astrea family drama. I've pointed out the pattern of introducing new characters in smaller groups and why it's effective. Almost all named characters have been introduced thus, with a handful of exceptions. Kruj and Anastasia were both introduced as part of the royal selection, even though we met all the knights and other candidates in small gatherings. As Otto pointed out in the season's premiere, though, they were the clear frontrunners. Powerful, well-known, leaders of large forces. They were brought in on a very crowded stage and are characterized as people who can lead the crowd. Something similar happened with Ricardo, who we meet as the white whale hunt begins. We'll also see him be a leader of others, going around and chatting and hyping the other fighters up. Indeed, we see that hype man side again this season when he helps pull Garfield out of his funk. For these characters, both their introductions and characterizations are all about their dynamics with others. This season, then, we meet Heinkel, and we do so while the stage is pretty full. His immediate characterization is also in terms of his dynamic to others, but this time it's in a negative way. There is pre-existing friction between Wilhelm and Reinhard, and his disruption ensures that it persists into the season, while also making it public knowledge. Thanks. His position as vice captain gives him another dynamic in relation to Reinhard and Julius. Technically they're superior, but apparently not a respected one, and perhaps not one who climbed to that position of authority on merit, a contrast to Kruj and Anastasia and Ricardo. I've said previously that knights and the concept of knighthood seem like an idea we're going to play with this season, and Heinkel brings a different lens entirely. Turns out we'd only been exposed to some of the more exemplary examples of the Lagunica knighthood. I'm especially amused to now recall Subaru's accusation in the royal selection that they were only acting like big shots with their daddy's name. That may not apply to a lot of the knights, but is perhaps on the money for this little respected man who is somehow vice captain while being the son of the former captain of the Royal Guard. Certainly the situation where Heinkel takes Felt hostage and gives orders to Reinhard is a test of competing duties and identities. He is Reinhard's superior officer, and apparently also the head of his household, but he's giving an order to stay out of the outer conflict, something that almost certainly falls within the purview of the kingdom's knights, and is threatening Felt, the person to whom Reinhard has pledged loyalty and supports to rule everyone. What's more, Felt is ordering him to disregard her situation and go join the fight. There is no choice Reinhard can make that doesn't seem like disobedience to someone, never mind whatever it is that he personally wants to do. When Otto provides a distraction with the Zoda bug, an amusing callback to his own backstory when he accidentally terrorized his hometown, Reinhard takes the opportunity to eliminate the threat to Felt, but we don't really know what else he would have done. Felt is a woman of action, though, and collapses his order givers down to just one. Even still, he is hesitant to leave her, believing that a critical part of his duty, perhaps even his identity as a knight. And I think perhaps that identity comes from this Astrea family drama. While I'm sure we will get fuller details at some point, it seems that young Reinhard was involved in the events that led to Theresia's death, such that a grieving Wilhelm accused him of having killed the former master swordsman. Now, I'm sure this wasn't that Reinhard took a sword and physically murdered her or anything. There was probably something he did or said which spurred the situation, leading to her ill-fated fight with the white whale. Wilhelm can lash out at those he loves, something we literally saw him do in his memories with Theresia, but he made up with her, and he wants to make up with Reinhard. He's just not very good at it, and he tends to default to inaction. He waited too long to tell Theresia he loved her, something I talked about in my long Subaru video, and so it's no surprise he has waited too long to talk to Reinhard. He even waits too long when cooking the okonomiyaki and burns it. Even the idea that he was waiting on his sworn revenge against the whale is no longer an excuse because it's been a year hence. Just like in the literary story with the more famous white whale, there are consequences to a fixation on revenge, and this strained division between Wilhelm and Reinhard is one of them. I mean, think how powerful of a force they would be if united. Wilhelm doesn't appear to use any kind of magic, just pure physical training and aptitude, and so he is one of the few people who could actually fight along his grandson. Come to think of it, if Theresia had the same capability as Reinhard, then this might be why he could even hope to defeat her, and thus allow her to live the life she preferred. I'm going to come back to that part of his history in just a moment. In the meantime, Reinhard had this unfair accusation levied against him, and then apparently inherited the Master Swordsman title and sword, and perhaps the powers he wields are the birthright of that bloodline. At the same time this happened, a member of the royal family was kidnapped, and Wilhelm was involved in trying to recover them. While we aren't actually told the outcome, it seems like he was unsuccessful, and there might have been something of a falling out in the aftermath. If he failed, then perhaps there was public shame, or perhaps Wilhelm didn't only blame Reinhard for his wife's loss. What we know for sure is that he is not a part of the royal guard these days. So, add in the picture that we have presented of Heinkel, and I think we can imagine that Reinhard feels some kind of duty to restore the Astrea name, or even act out some kind of penance. I mentioned previously that if Reinhard believed Felt was the kidnapped royal, then it would probably explain his motivation. Restoring her must seem like it would fix a lot of what went wrong. I could also imagine that he would try to be the very picture of respectable knighthood, instead of whatever he would want to be otherwise. There might even be kind of an inferiority complex at work here, as he will mention that he has not yet earned the title of Master Swordsman. Felt seems to be actively working to erode that part of him, in fact, not just in the sense that she thumbs her nose at his attempts to get her to act like his picture of ladylike, but in challenges to his behavior. I especially liked when she got him to leave her after the incident with Heinkel, and while he urges her not to do anything reckless, she demands that he better be reckless. I suspect, though, that Wilhelm and Reinhard getting to really chat might also challenge Reinhard's concept of being a knight. I'm going to return now to that subject of Wilhelm and Theresia's history. What we get is pretty short, and it's intermixed with the white whale hunt as flashbacks, so I am extrapolating a bit, but it seems like Wilhelm was driven to master the sword as the only way he could think of to protect, and works his way up to being conferred a knighthood. This is the path he wants and believes he understands, but he is not yet particularly strong with this as his goal. Theresia saving him humiliates him, and in what could easily have been their last meeting, she handles him with ease. Being a knight in and of itself is not enough. Some time passes, and we see him challenge her in the same royal hall as the candidate selection, with the same knights and wise men assembled on both sides. And this time, Wilhelm prevails. He makes his motive plain. He is taking her sword from her. And while we might interpret this as a chauvinistic thing, that this is a man's job and so he should do it and she should step aside, I don't think this is the case. Maybe such thinking factored into his original embarrassment, or maybe it was only however much time he spent talking about swordplay in front of her without knowing who she was. But both his comments when she walks away in their heated scene, and those he makes to Subaru before the white whale, indicate that Theresia didn't really love the sword. She loved looking at flowers, which, as a concept, is pretty far removed from the duties of a master swordsman. Thus, I think about where he challenges her, the audience for their fight. Defeating her there in front of that host asserts that she is not the strongest with a sword, and if she's not the strongest, then perhaps she is no longer required to answer when the kingdom calls. Or rather, they will call on Wilhelm instead, and she will rarely have to take up the role. This is an act of love, and everything in her reactions says that she takes it this way. He is freeing her. But the key thing, I think, is motivation. When wielding a sword for the abstract notion of knighthood or protecting the kingdom, Wilhelm has only so much power. But when wielding it for the sake of the woman he loves, he becomes a force of nature. As he says, she need only become his reason for wielding it. In the earlier parts of his memory, we see her ask him if he likes flowers, and he says he hates them. In the royal hall, she asks again, and this time he at least doesn't hate them anymore. And before the whale hunt, Wilhelm is the one looking at flowers. To me, that is a neat little illustration of his changing understanding of what knighthood should be, or at least the reasons why one should be a swordsman at all, and I think they have moved far from a traditional position. There is even an amusing bit in the last arc of the first season, where Wilhelm ambushes Betelgeuse and cuts him down from behind. Subaru questions whether that isn't the worst thing a knight can do, and Wilhelm just bluntly states that chivalry is long dead. Thus, I think an eventual conversation between grandfather and grandson won't just be about trying to mend the past, but about this question of knighthood. what it should mean, and what it should lead them to do. Julius was the other kind of obvious target for an exploration of knighthood in this premiere. In his conversation with Subaru after Heinkel appears, he thanks him for basically saying the things he could not. Julius adheres to Lagunica's version of a chivalric code in spite of personal desire. And that's not some strange anomaly, and certainly being diplomatic with a superior officer isn't some great violation of his personal values. But the exchange introduces the idea itself, and so we might expect some much greater conflict between duty and personal loyalty in the story to come. In the 6th episode, Subaru even includes Julius in his own speech about knighthood, which I'm going to come back to later, by inferring that Julius would agree with his statement that he isn't content fighting only for his pledged candidate. That reminder might indicate that his turn is coming soon. And while I don't know exactly what it will be, I can't help but remember that his brother Joshua is somewhere in the city, last seen going to the gates to deliver a letter. Possibly more internal strife is in store here, though maybe a little bit simpler than the Astrea family situation. Now, that drama isn't easily resolved. Heinkel's presence creates some internal divisions just on its own, but the person who brought him in the first place is an agent of chaos in her own right. I especially want to highlight Priscilla's entrance to the season. The other candidates and knights are meeting in this Japanese-inspired hotel, the product of someone almost certainly who has isekai'd in the past. As it is Japanese style then, everyone has removed their shoes and they even comment on the custom. The very first image of Priscilla in the premiere, though, focuses on her shoe-clad feet. Her first reintroduction reminds us that she is one who breaks the rules. In fact, there may be something to that beyond mere personality. Priscilla has asserted that the world is designed to operate in the way that works best for her, which leads her to believe that her becoming the ruler is a foregone conclusion. But maybe this isn't a grandiose delusion. She apparently married well, and then said husband died, gifting her with territory and allegiances. We've seen how abrasive she can be to others, and it's little wonder that Anastasia didn't invite her, but Otto informs us that she is winning over the people, being named the Sun Princess as evidence of her popularity. And even without an invite, she finds her way to the meeting all the same. She may have some kind of luck stat or divine protection of serendipity or something, but she also personally likes to inject situations with turmoil for amusement. Remember, she is the reason that Subaru gets into the royal selection at all, a situation rather akin to what she has done with Heinkel this time. She is also the one who says something to Emilia in the 2nd episode, which leads her to following Subaru, learning the truth, and then ultimately being kidnapped by Regulus. Now, despite this chaos, it's not like she is actually allied with the cultists or has nothing principled about her. She praised Liliana's faith in sticking to her chosen path, and clearly is rather attached to the songstress now. She will likewise commend Subaru for his mettle at not losing heart concerning the announcement of Regulus's intended marriage to Emilia, even if the sadist in her enjoyed delivering the message. This is in stark contrast to a loop in Season 1, where she said that she would consider helping him so long as he would lick her feet. But seeing that he would compromise himself in this way, she becomes enraged, nearly murderous in her anger. Interestingly, she has a tell. In all these instances, she will do this thing where she puts her fan up to her lips after delivering a challenge, waiting to see how the other responds, as though she is conducting a test, and then decides her orientation to that person based on whether or not they pass. And despite what she says, she appears indeed to be taking Liliana around to each shelter to play her calming music and counteract Sirius's power. Subaru at least suspects as much at the end. Even though she claims she is only looking for Sholto, we see her confirm Sholto's absence even before the serenade, so that excuse doesn't hold up very well. Of course, we can pile all of this on top of the revelation that she is possessed of some crazy power. We knew she was surprisingly strong in Season 1 when she hurls Subaru across the room, but some Matrix-style fire sword wielding is something else. Subaru and I are on the same page here. What exactly is she capable of? If somehow Priscilla wasn't enough of an X-Factor, we also have Al. Honestly, the effectiveness with which he plays the Priscilla Whisperer is already enough to wonder about him, but his strange dress, hidden face, and missing arm scream at us to be curious of his past. I have been wondering, in fact, if Priscilla's good luck and popularity are something that he is doing, considering that she never seems to direct her wrath his way to the same degree as everyone else. The absolute biggest mystery, though, is his full name, Aldebaran. It's a star name, like the Archbishop's and Subaru, but he doesn't like to be called by it. One of the more persistent fan theories in our discussions is the possibility that he might be the Archbishop of Pride, but not actually a part of the witch's cult, however it is that works. Subaru has a star name, and his association with Satila makes him something akin to the Archbishop of Envy. We are told by Betelgeuse that Pride's seat is empty, and here is this other guy running around with a star's name and a whole bunch of strange circumstances. Though I guess it's also possible that the whole reason the cultists want Tifan's remains is due to the empty seat, since she is the Witch of Pride. Maybe witch factors are something that is extracted from a witch's corpse or something like that. Anyway, Al knows the name of said witch, and knows about hiding her true name from gluttony, which also makes us wonder if he's the one with the Tome of Wisdom that Capella adds to the new demands. But he certainly has hidden depths no matter the answer. In this last episode, it comes out that the water gates which opened in the 5th episode were actually open only briefly, greatly minimizing damage, and then that Capella claimed not to have been the one who did so. In fact, we did see her at the government building at the time, so we are her alibi. The fact that she is no longer at that building may mean that the gate opening caused her to retreat to her tower. I bring this up because Al is probably the #1 suspect for this action. He left the party saying he was going to look for Priscilla, but they are not together. The amazing stinger at the episode's end indicates that Al has picked up a media that can connect to Reguluses from somewhere, and the brief image on it doesn't look like the interior of any building that I think we have yet seen. So Priscilla's entire entourage is a kind of disruptive collective, being outside the plans of Anastasia and those of the witch cultists. And I say Anastasia's plans because I am sure she didn't gather the other 3 at the same time by mere coincidence. Her Merchants and Information Network probably sniffed up that something was going to happen, and she maneuvered a powerful group of folks to arrive in the nick of time. I guess it's even possible that Priscilla was leaked the information to get her here in a plausibly deniable way, though personally I like the theory that she's just purely chaos. The 6th episode perhaps hints that Anastasia has more she is hiding. When Subaru volunteers the information about Betty as an artificial spirit, he'll say that hiding it would only benefit the enemy. Anastasia repeats this, considers it, and in such a way may suggest that she is thinking about something that she perhaps should disclose, now that it's been put like that. I said that RE0 handles its large cast well, and one of the best examples is how each character is given motivations and their own value system. Each has their own goals and priorities. Anastasia's characterization of thinking like a merchant is consistent, and could cause some internal strife even while they are on the same side and share some goals. Another really strong example of this in the 3rd season is Garfield. He has left the sanctuary and found a new purpose in Emilia's camp, has apparently even become known as Emilia's shield, and given some kids the boastful name of Gorgeous Tiger. He's been carving out a new identity for himself. But this is thrown into some chaos when he discovers his amnesiac mother Ricia alive and well in the city, and with a new family to boot. She has even named her kids variations of Frederica and Garfield, gender swapped. Some part of who she was persists, even if she has forgotten. This, though, is a crisis for Garfield. His struggle in Season 2 revolved around how he dealt with the feeling of being rejected by his mother. His coping strategy was to believe that she had left to become happy, that 2 demi-human kids and no father wasn't a life that she wanted. In that way, at least, the pain he felt at least accomplished something. But when he discovers the landslide, he believes she must instead be dead, and so his rejection and loneliness amounted to nothing, were just pointless suffering. Learning she wasn't rejecting them after all helped heal him, allowing him to move on. Now he discovers that his original hope/cope has come true. She is happy, safe, loving family. And as badly as he probably wants to tell her the truth and actually get to know the person he calls mom, Garf decides he can't. It's a really nice scene too, given space to breathe. He asks enough of her husband to make it plain that he knows something about her. Discovering her lost memory though, he knows that she didn't leave him behind on purpose. In fact, learning she has 2 abandoned kids out in the world would probably be devastating news, whether or not it's her fault. And so, in answer to what his relationship is to Ricia, he looks up into the sky for a bit, gathers his thoughts, and then claims no relation. He once wished for her happiness, and now that she's found it, he cannot take it from her, whatever he may want. At the end of that episode, though, he'll learn that happiness is in peril. The kids are missing, though she believes they would know to seek the shelters, but her husband works at the government building housing the broadcast media, which has been taken over by the cultists. Garfield is a loyal part of Emilia's group and should rush to their aid, but this is a very personal matter that competes for his priorities. Indeed, there is this kind of framing of choices behind him, 2 people on one path and a family of 4 on the other, as he is similarly as a crossroads between her family and his loyalty to Subaru and Emilia. He goes to the government building ultimately, but this choice leads to Mimi getting attacked by the magic-breaking sword and receiving the unhealing wound. Unfortunate anyway, but a real blow to Garf, both because of the guilt and because of their newfound friendship. So let's divert a moment to talk about Mimi. In the premiere, she gloms onto Subaru and declares that she is now a grown-up woman. And perhaps our reaction to that is bet. But if you watch how she navigates Garf's crisis, then maybe we owe her an apology for our skepticism. When she notices him at a loss at his mother's statement, she takes his hand and gets them to leave. When she notices he is uncertain of taking the gift, she plays the impulsive kid to take them herself. She will announce that she knows that is his mother so that he can broach the subject. And she encourages him to cry it out, offering her own grown woman's bosom as the appropriate place. And he takes her up on it, feeling all the better the next day. She was also helpful for another crisis of his, a worry over his strength. Garfield has an identity created out of being the strongest, and even a brief brush with Reinhard has shattered it. It's what led to him wandering the city and encountering his mother in the first place, and Mimi was along for the ride. She tries to reframe his perspective a bit, successfully, and when he rescues the kids with that strength, it would seem that a full identity collapse is averted. Mimi is the angel on his shoulder, in a sense, and now that she is sidelined, he might be in trouble. As it turns out, he also has a devil on his shoulder in the form of Elsa. It's quite the curious development to learn that Garf is haunted by Elsa, who especially appears in his moments of fearing weakness or feeling confusion. One of her early accusations is that he only beat her because he got a little lucky, rather than as a result of being stronger. And indeed, the opening he used in the fight was her distraction over Mei Li being in peril and then snatched by Frederica. In a sense, he exploited her concern for her sister, and so maybe this is his own doubt being given a voice. But I'm a little curious about it as something more. For one thing, I've never quite understood exactly what happened when she was beaten. She is a vampire, apparently, and while we haven't been told what exactly that means for this world, she was capable of coming back from Betty freezing and shattering her. Why then would being crushed by a rock be sufficient to finish her off for good? And then I think about what happened right before. Garf actually bites her neck, and she ends up biting his shoulder in turn, and they writhe a bit and struggle. And then when she stands up, she puts her hand to her neck, and his bite wound is not healing. It's like the vampiric regeneration has been turned off. So, did he just steal her powers or something? Is she not a simple hallucination, but actually inside him in some way, just popping up at certain triggers? Maybe that's reaching a bit, but Elsa as this haunting spirit is pretty curious. At the least, with Mimi injured, I expect it to happen again, and perhaps this time with more tangible consequences. One last thing concerning Garf and possible internal strife. Running into his mother and his reaction to it set up a chain of events that might bring him into conflict with Julius. I mentioned earlier that Joshua was last seen being sent on an errand over a letter, but the only reason it's him is because Hetero and TV aren't around, and they aren't around because they're looking for Mimi, and Mimi isn't back because she's staying out with Garf. If something has happened to Joshua, then Garf's impulsive behavior will be the proximate cause. Now, all this interweaving character play and distinct motivations are a great example of what I said at the outset, the way RE0 manages its large cast, and the earlier part of the season also handles a time skip and a new setup pretty well. The overlong first episode introduces all manner of possible storylines, and lets the audience revel a bit in getting so many Season 1 characters back on stage, which is then capped off by the excellent introduction to Sirius that I praised in the past video. The second episode then gives us a novel twist on Return by Death, with the reset point incredibly close to the point of death, creating a different kind of scramble than we have had in the past loops. From there, though, things have been a bit chaotic. It's managed to keep the narrative from bogging down with a couple of deft uses of time skips while Subaru is incapacitated, but there is a lot of shuffling around to brief scenes to keep all the balls in the air, so to speak. Things like Garf's situation with his mother and Capilla's introduction, they still got enough space to help their impact, but these middle episodes haven't had that same unity of identity. And I bring all that up because the 6th episode seems like a return to form. This episode is told entirely from Subaru and Emilia's point of view, the two people left in something of a cliffhanger position the week before. It swaps back and forth between them, and in so doing, emphasizes the way in which they are both working toward the same goal with the same ideological drive. We finally get a real answer for how Emilia will handle the presumptive damsel in distress role. She understands that the whole city is being threatened should she not go through with the wedding, and must do her best to play along with Regulus. She's not very good at lying, though, and can't really hide her lack of enthusiasm. She'll hit upon the excuse of being tired and ask to rest, not only mollifying Regulus, but separating from him. But Regulus almost impulsively tries to kill 184 for not noticing Emilia's state. He doesn't finish the job or anything, and so it may have been a way to see if Emilia is the kind who wants to save others. After all, if she is, then he may not need to worry about her running away and dooming the city. Saving 184 prompts a short conversation about the other wives, whether they all try to make themselves small to avoid his attention, or would all just accept their own deaths. Indeed, we have the nice detail of how 184 stands in shadow during the scene while Regulus is in the room, visually receding from notice. And we have the much sadder detail, if you slow down his attack, where we can see that at the moment she was about to die, she broke into a smile. This is all a shock to Emilia, who has the idealized notion of marriage as only this great confluence of happiness. Naive she may be, but I think this also helps spur her to action. Emilia will not be the damsel in distress, but she will play act as one while she gathers information. Being meek and compliant will afford her the opportunity to sneak around, especially if Regulus is unaware of her magical capacity. Her thoughts are not of leaving, but of how she can nevertheless be of use to Subaru and the others despite her situation. And while Al being on the other end of the metia is an amazing way to end, in a practical sense, it means that she suddenly has a way to share the things that she'll learn. Thus, I expect Emilia to remain, keeping up the ruse as well as she can, because she will not risk harm to the citizens or the other wives should she flee on her own. Subaru, likewise, resolves himself not to think in terms of minimizing losses, but of not accepting innocent casualties at all. This comes out in his discussion with Anastasia and Julius. Their little alliance of candidates are the de facto governing force in the city right now, and so all the citizenry must be their concern. Subaru ends up declaring his own concept of what knighthood must mean. People like them that take up arms and pledge to protect others are in a different situation than those who are only bystanders. The cultists have their own resolve, a complete disregard for the lives of others, and so their own conviction must be just as strong in the other direction. Being Emilia's knight does not mean he is a knight for Emilia only. He intends to give the cultists none of their demands, no compromises at all. This may indeed be too unrealistic a goal, but it may matter that he declared it all the same. I think perhaps Subaru this season has been waking up to the fact that he has more clout and respect than he thought. Wilhelm praises him, talks about how his name has spread far and wide, and Liliana, knowing so many of his details, supports that notion. Ricardo declares that Subaru gives them the power of 100 after he names himself the one who will hold them back, and Cruz suggests that she is relieved to have him along. They were all worried a moment when he talks about Emilia and Regulus's clutches, and relieved when he says that he knows other things must come first. These people want him in their conferences. They give weight to the things he says. And in that position, setting out a high standard for victory may shape things toward a better end. The first part of their conversation, I think, supports this as well. I already mentioned Subaru volunteering the fact of Betty being an artificial spirit, which I think will give Anastasia something to think about. But he also has information on the Tome of Wisdom, something she apparently had no idea about. This, once again, adds to his value in their eyes, but he also takes a considerable risk when he explains why he has the information. Remember that Subaru has repeatedly been suspected of being a witch cultist, either because of the smell of Satala, or because of having information that seems impossible to have learned otherwise. So, him admitting to have spoken directly to a witch is high risk, but that risk, just like admitting the truth of Betty, is a small concession against all the lives that they find in their hands. Since he is determined to save everybody in the shelters, I expect him to put two and two together and get Liliana to the broadcast media that they now control. Maybe that will make his goal seem less impossible, and further belief in total victory will spread. So, last thought. I started this season thinking that maybe it would revolve around Subaru trying to figure out what it meant to be Emilia's knight. And musing so, I thought perhaps he would follow other examples and find them lacking, or just generally do the wrong thing and have to circle back to something else. But maybe I've got the wrong of it. Maybe the one-time self-proclaimed knight will actually influence the others, that he'll find his version of authentic knighthood first and dare the rest to follow. I guess we'll see.